This short film presents curators and contributors to a trail called Nothing Without Us, Experiences of Disability for the Pitt Rivers Museum, Oxford. A purple logo shows a ring of rectangles changing into circles, then squares. A title reads, Curating for Change. A blue sky spreads over Oxford and the high Gothic arch windows of the University Museum. In the Pitt Rivers building, a central space is filled with display cases, overlooked by a Native American totem pole.
I've always been passionate about the heritage of disabled people in the past because of my background in studying disability and antiquity, but I certainly think by having the opportunity to curate on that knowledge has definitely given me a deeper sense of certainty that this is the path that I want to take.
A young man sits in a wheelchair among the display cases.
My name is Kyle Lewis Jordan. I am the Curating for Change Fellow based at the Ashmolean and Pitt Rivers Museums in Oxford. I'm a white man in my late 20s with brown hair, slight moustache and green eyes with some square frame glasses, currently wearing quite nice dapper three-piece suit, I like to believe so.
A brochure title reads, Nothing Without Us, Experiences of Disability.
I started the project back in September of 2022. And it very much started for me as a chance to really jump into the collections of these two rather large museums to really ask, okay, what can we find that's related to disability? So I used key search terms around disability, phrases that we use, both derogatory but also kind of contemporary phrases, to see what comes back from the database. And we get thousands of objects. And it's like, wow, okay, we're not going to be able to get through these all, but when I can now kind of, get myself familiarized with the museums and their collections, I start to think, okay, how can I best utilize them to tell a story about disability?
Kyle propels his wheelchair between vertical cases to a glass-covered display table, which contains a mauve information board.
So this case, I think, has my favorite synergy because of the connection that kind of runs through each of the three stories. Because if we start from the center, we have a braille book and pin. And this pin in the past was just sat in a case with no interpretation. But then on the left you have Hairbrained, which is an art piece by one of our co-producers, Hannah. And they created this as an embroidery, as a way of expressing how they use patterns and tallying as a way of grounding themselves when they're getting overstimulated. And then finally on the right side we have an Egyptian heart scarab, which was used by our co-producer Chris to explore experiences of anxiety and locating feelings of trauma within the body, which relates to the ancient Egyptian belief that the heart was the center of the mind, and they used these scarabs to calm the heart before it was weighed in the afterlife.
Kyle studies a display.
I'm Laura van Broekhoven and I'm the director of the Pitt Rivers Museum. I'm a woman, I have long hair, I have glasses. Our experience is that the only way that real change happens, and the idea of curating for change is for change to happen, is if it's not just working with one department or one section of a museum, but actually that also front of house is included and education is included and research is included and collections are included. And that was sort of the way that Kyle wanted to approach the program.
A woman signs beside Kyle, who speaks to a group, a yellow balloon tied to his wheelchair.
I worked with a group of local disabled people, 10 in total, to find their personal stories through the objects in this collection. So working with my co-producers, we started to pick out some objects and we used those to tell their stories, but in a way that we hope is inviting the general public to really think about how we're all affected by these things. We spoke about three kind of key broad overarching themes, which is the idea of form and function, how we look and how we act, and how that has been represented in objects over time. Precarity and violence, how disabled people are unfortunately made disabled by violence or are put into vulnerable situations and why that happens. And finally, care, how care is an important act for all of us and how disabled people can give a unique perspective on the act of care.
A case displays models of a hand, a foot and a heart. Then a mature woman speaks.
My name is Juliet and I am one of the co-producers. I'm wearing a dark blue dress and a blue coat. I have blonde long hair. I made 3 cloth pieces that Kyle placed in the Maiming Gallery, and they're really about my family. So I was born and I was fine, and then my number 2 brother was born and he had a hole in the heart.
The cloth heart has veins embroidered in delicate gold thread.
And his had open heart surgery. So when he was 4, you had a zipper from there to there. Age 40, he had to have it again. It's a valve that gets fixed. He's healthy, lives a very full, active life. That's James. And then Christopher was born, and Christopher was born with a bone disease called FOP, very rare disease, whereby you're born with a crooked toe. And the surgeon's intervention then was, I know best, I will straighten that big toe.
The cloth foot's big toe bends under its neighbour.
And then there's a hand.
The cloth hand looks like a white glove.
And the hand is me, because when I was 13, I broke my neck in a riding accident and I was paralysed from the neck downwards.
The fingers are tightly bunched.
And then I recovered quite a lot of my left side and then some of my right. But nothing ever comes back perfectly, so I can't feel temperature in this hand. And it's also you can't feel texture very well. So I call it like wearing a glove.
My name is Brenda Llewellyn-Eisen. I'm a professor of early and medieval Christian history in Washington State. I am a 57-year-old Caucasian woman with long red hair, very white skin, dark blue eyes. They began the process by introducing us to different pieces of material culture and asking us to ask questions about them and think about them. What might this object reveal to us? And that's exactly what I do in the classroom with my students. So to me, that felt very comfortable. It felt very normal. I think that we tend to assume that all questions that we ask about objects in the past have to reveal some kind of truth. And they can't. We can't know. I can sit here as a historian and say that we cannot know with certainty that all of the objects we worked with have anything to do with disability. We're just asking questions about that. And so they encouraged us to start asking those kinds of questions about those objects. And I think it was really effective in getting people to start thinking creatively, because it's creative thinking that helps to fuel scholarship about the past.
Kyle looks at a table display surrounded by masks from diverse cultures.
And what he really wanted to show is how disability is not something that is just limited to a certain time, like our time, or it's not limited to one place on Earth, but actually it's always been everywhere, but we've underrepresented it in our galleries. And we've not really highlighted objects that can show how disability is part of the ways of being and the ways of knowing and the ways of coping of everyone in the world. So I think that's what he really wanted to showcase, is how that's been around forever and it's in our galleries, and now highlight those objects.
Laura sits with Kyle, who speaks at the trail opening.
As the curator, it has been my utmost privilege and pleasure to work with such a caring, dedicated and selfless group of people. My co-producers, my colleagues here at the Pitt Rivers, over at the Ashmolean, and from the entire Curating for Change programme have given me not only their time and expertise, but have reaffirmed my belief that museums can be great vehicles for social well-being and understanding.
Under the high vault of the museum's central space, Kyle speaks to a line of visitors.
We can begin to achieve this through making and holding space for diverse perspectives and untangling ourselves from the idea of the museum voice in the singular. Museums are full of objects, and objects carry imprints of us. But we can only hope to begin to understand us if we start to see and hear ourselves represented within.
In the central space, the smiling crowd applauds.
Curating for Change is an important organization because all museums need to be doing this kind of work right now. Conversations about representation in museums need to happen with sensitivity, and they need to happen with care. It's not just disabled people who should be represented in museums. All people should be represented in museums. That's not the question. The question is how.
Brenda talks to a group around a large table, while in the museum, a visitor holds Juliet's craftwork foot.
I would hope that Curating for Change would influence other museums and allow for more voices to be heard.
Kyle propels away from us between wood and glass display cases. A fade to black reveals the purple logo, Curating for Change. Credits: filmmaker Oliver Parkin, assistant filmmaker Rowan Scully, producers Esther Fox and Ruth Gard, British Sign Language interpreter Marcel Hirschman, audio description Eleni Hadjidaniel and Ian Turton, with thanks to all our fellows, co-producers and museum partners. Further logos appear in order top to bottom on the black background. Screen South, and a purple capital A with the word Accentuate in its crossbar. The crossed finger logo of the National Lottery Heritage Fund. The circular badge of Arts Council England, supported using public funding. The logo for Art Fund. Funded by the UK government.